When the Arctic winds sweep across Yakutia and the land sinks into weeks of darkness, the cold reaches a level that almost defies imagination. At minus 71 degrees, the air stings like needles. Trees split open from the pressure of their own frozen sap. Even the sound of footsteps feels slower, as if the cold thickens the air itself. Yet inside Yakutian homes scattered across this enormous land, firelight glows softly. People cook, talk, and rest, while the outside world feels closer to space than to anything familiar. Warmth does not come from modern machines. It comes from design, memory, and careful choices shaped over centuries of endurance. Walls, floors, hides, and small details all work together to hold heat in a place where losing it can mean losing everything. Families rely on knowledge that has passed from elder to child for generations. So how did people in the coldest inhabited place on Earth keep their homes livable when the world outside could reach minus 71 degrees? Stay close. By the end of this video, you will see warmth in a new way. This is how the Yakuts stay alive inside a winter that almost never ends. When the first breath of winter sweeps across Yakutia, the land changes shape. Rivers harden into opaque stone. The sky turns pale and still. The cold settles over everything like a weight. Long before modern houses appeared in the region, Yakut families faced this frozen world with a building method that protected them through the harshest nights. They chose the strongest material around them, the larch trees that grow slowly in the permafrost, and turned those trunks into walls thick enough to stand against the cold year after year. Larch does not behave like ordinary wood. It grows dense and heavy because it survives short summers and extreme winters. Yakut builders learned to cut each log so precisely that the pieces fit together almost seamlessly. But wood alone could not defeat the wind. To close the tiny spaces between the logs, they gathered kukuznik moss from the forests. This soft, springy moss was pressed into the gaps until the walls formed a tight seal. The moss did more than fill space. It swelled gently when damp and dried slowly in winter, creating a natural barrier that locked in heat and kept out the cold. Inside these log houses, the warmth from the hearth spread through the room and remained steady even as temperatures outside dropped far below what most places on Earth ever experience. The walls held heat the way a thick coat holds body warmth, creating a shelter that felt calm and familiar despite the dangers outside. Families slept, ate, and shared stories near the fire, trusting the work of their own hands to keep them safe. In many villages today, you can still find houses built with the same method. Some are modernized, but the core idea remains unchanged. Larch logs and moss insulation remain reliable in a land where cold can break glass and freeze metal. Builders continue the tradition not out of nostalgia, but because it still works. Knowledge survives in places where survival depends on it. As the logs breathe quietly in the cold, another technique waits nearby, shaped by years of ritual, family life, and fire. The next method begins at the center of the home, where warmth first took shape. Step inside an early Yakut balagan during the deep winter, and the first thing you notice is the glow. Not bright, not loud, but steady and alive. A single fire burns in the middle of the room, its flames reaching upward toward a small opening cut into the roof. Outside, the world may be locked at minus 60 or minus 70, yet here, the air feels warm enough for families to sit together, cook, mend tools, and rest without fear. This fire, called the ogon, was the heart of every traditional Yakut home. The idea came long before log houses and Russian stoves ever arrived in the region. Early Yakut people relied on portable shelters and wooden frameworks covered with hides or bark, built low to the ground to trap heat. At the center of these structures, they placed an open hearth. It gave warmth, cooked meals, dried clothing, and even served spiritual roles. Smoke drifted slowly through the roof vent, carrying prayers and gratitude toward the sky. Every spark had meaning, and every ember had purpose. The survival secret of the ogon was simple. Instead of heating the entire structure, it warmed the people directly. Thick layers of fur clothing and bedding held onto the heat, allowing families to stay close to the fire for hours. The flames also warmed stones placed around the pit. When moved to sleeping areas, these stones continued to radiate gentle heat long after the fire died down. Nothing was wasted. Every part of the fire's life was used to help someone through the night. Even today, many Yakut families who live in remote areas still keep a central hearth for ritual gatherings, traditional food preparation, or winter storytelling. It is a reminder of a time when survival depended not on machines, but on attention, skill, and the shared warmth of a single flame. The Balagan hearth represents connection. It brought families together, encouraged cooperation, and created a sense of comfort even when winter pressed in from every side. But the story of Yakut warmth does not end with an open fire. As their homes evolved, the people learned to shape the very land around them into protection. The next method begins with earthen sod built to hold heat against a cold that never rests. Snow drifts across the tundra of Yakutia in slow, heavy waves, settling against shapes that barely rise above the ground. Step closer, and you notice what at first looked like a mound of earth is a home, its walls thick with frozen soil and sod. Inside, the air holds a steady warmth that feels almost impossible in a land where breath can crystallize in seconds. This was one of the earliest Yakut defenses against the cold, walls built from the same earth that winter tried to claim. Long before heavy timber houses became common, Yakut families faced a question with no margin for error. How do you build shelter in a climate where the cold can crack bones and swallow fire? Their answer began with the ground itself. Builders dug shallow depressions, lifted wooden frames, and packed them with layers of sod, clay, and turf. The land became part of the house, forming walls so dense that the wind slid past without finding a way inside. The strength of these walls came from their slow response to temperature. Earth warms gradually. It cools just as slowly. Once heated by a central hearth, the thick sod held that warmth for hours, sometimes until morning. Snow piled along the outer edges acted as another gift of the climate, sealing tiny gaps and adding insulation that modern builders would admire. Inside, families cooked over low fires, and the glow of embers softened the room. Even the silence was comforting because the earth muted the howls of the storm outside. Living in these houses shaped daily life. The dim interior became a place of steady rhythm, where children learned to twist rope or carve tools while elders watched over the fire. The structure itself taught cooperation. Everyone shared the warmth. Everyone helped maintain the walls when spring softened the ground. Traces of this knowledge remain today. Yakut builders still use the land as a shield, placing homes in covered forms. The principle never vanished. It adapted. And from these early walls shaped by soil and snow, Yakut ingenuity pushed deeper into the house itself, finding new ways to protect warmth where the ground never thaws. In the long darkness of Yakutian winter, light becomes a rare visitor. Houses sit against the frozen horizon with barely a glimmer from within, and it is easy to wonder why no windows break the heavy walls. Step closer, though, and the reason becomes clear. At temperatures that can fall past -50, even a hand-sized opening can drain a home of warmth faster than a fire can replace it. So early Yakut builders learned to keep the outside out by limiting the openings the cold could exploit. This idea began centuries ago in scattered settlements along the Lena River. Families noticed that homes with larger openings froze faster no matter how hard the hearth burned. Cold slipped through every gap. Frost crept along every frame. To survive, builders reduced the size of windows until they became narrow slits or tiny squares set high in the wall. Some houses removed them entirely for winter. When light was needed, thin sheets of animal bladder stretched across small frames, let a soft glow pass without letting heat escape. The real strength of this design was its control. With almost no exposed surface facing the cold, the inner air stayed still and warm. Each wall became a shield, each corner a pocket of comfort. Fire from a central hearth spread through the room and stayed there instead of fleeing through glass or gaps. Smoke escaped through a controlled vent or chimney, but warmth remained. Life inside those dim rooms settled into its own rhythm. Families gathered close to the hearth. Shadows moved across wooden beams. The glow of burning larch lit the room in amber. During storms, the small windows filled with frost patterns, turning the house into a quiet refuge away from a world that seemed carved from ice. Even today, many Yakut homes keep windows minimal in winter, opening shutters only when needed. Old knowledge stays alive because it works. And after shaping the walls and openings so carefully, Yakut builders turned their attention downward, finding ways to protect the warmth beneath their feet. Walk into an old Yakut winter house, and the first thing you notice is the silence beneath your steps. The floor feels warm, steady, and alive, even while frost thickens outside. This warmth does not come from luck. It comes from a design shaped by centuries of living above ground that never thaws. In Yakutia, the earth stays frozen year after year. Touch it with bare skin in winter, and it feels like iron. Build a home directly on it, and the cold pulls heat downwards until the room is as numb as the soil beneath. So Yakut builders learned to lift the floor away from the permafrost. The idea began with early wooden dwellings in the Lena and Vilju regions. Families noticed that floors set on low stilts or raised beams lost less heat. Cold air stayed trapped below instead of seeping upward. Over time, they refined the method. They built sturdy wooden platforms several inches above the ground. The empty space beneath became a buffer, a quiet zone that kept the frost at a distance. Then they filled that space with layers of straw, hay, bark, or packed moss. Each layer trapped air. Each layer slowed the cold. Together, they turned a fragile platform into a strong shield against the frozen earth. Inside the home, the difference was unmistakable. Heat from the hearth stayed in the room. The floor held warmth even after the fire dimmed. Children sat on the wooden planks to play. Elders rested near the warmest boards. The floor became a gathering space, not a source of discomfort. This design also shaped how Yakuts built their settlements. Raised floors allowed houses to survive shifting permafrost. Repairs were simpler. Homes lasted longer. Even with the arrival of Russian construction methods, many Yakut builders kept the raised floor tradition because no other design handled the deep cold as reliably. Modern Yakut houses use updated materials, but the old wisdom remains. Lift the living space, protect it from the earth that never thaws. Let warmth settle where people gather. And once the floor was secured against the cold, Yakut families looked to the place they slept, creating beds that held heat through the longest nights. Step into a Yakut home on a night when the sky glitters at -60, and you will see something quietly powerful. In the warmest corner of the room, thick layers of felt and fur rest on a raised platform, waiting like a refuge. Touch the surface, and your fingers sink into softness that holds heat as if it were alive. This sleeping space is not decoration. It is protection crafted over centuries of surviving nights that last too long and burn with cold. The idea began in the river valleys near the Lena and Aldan, where herding families depended on their animals, not only for food and tools, but for warmth itself. Reindeer hides, horsehair felt, and cattle skins became essential materials. Each one trapped heat in its fibers. Each one stayed warm, even when the air froze solid. Families learned to layer them, stacking hide over hide until they formed a kind of natural insulation, far thicker than cloth. The platform beneath was usually wooden, slightly raised to avoid the pull of the frozen ground. Together, the layers created a bed that stayed warm long after the fire faded. At the end of a long winter day, families gathered on these platforms. Children curled into the warmest center. Parents pressed close to block drafts. Thick coverings were pulled over everyone, turning the sleeping area into a pocket of heat strong enough to last until morning. In many Yakut homes, this corner became the heart of winter life. Stories were told here. Meals were shared. Newborns were kept close to the warmth. The sleeping platform was not only a place to rest, it was a safeguard. Even today, Yakut households often keep traditional felt or fur layers for the coldest weeks. Modern blankets help, but the old materials still perform better when temperatures crash to levels most people never experience. The craft continues because it works. Once the family had a bed that held warmth like a living shield, they turned to another challenge. A single fire could heat more than the body. It could reshape the architecture itself. Step inside a winter house in central Yakutia, and your eyes fall first on a massive block of brick rising quietly from the floor. It does not roar with flame. It does not glow. Yet the warmth around it feels alive, wrapping the room in a steady calm. This is the masonry stove, a Russian invention that the Yakuts reshaped so it could survive a land where cold tests every breath. When Russian settlers arrived in the 17th century, they brought the pechka, a heavy stone heater built for snowy forests. The Yakuts studied it closely. Their own winters dropped far below what the Russians had known. Gathering firewood could take hours in deep frost, and every log mattered. So they adjusted the stove's shape, thickened the walls, and added a network of inner channels that forced heat to travel slowly through the bricks before escaping. What entered as fire left as stored warmth. Inside the stove, rising smoke curled through tight passageways, brushing every surface and filling the masonry with heat. The clay exterior sealed that warmth like a jar holding summer fruit. Long after the coals went dark, the bricks continued to radiate heat into the room, keeping families warm through nights when the world outside froze solid. Meals simmered on its flat top, boots dried near its base. Children rested against the warm side after walking home through the snow. In many Yakut homes, the stove created a natural gathering place. Life grew around it because it gave both comfort and security when the cold pressed hardest against the walls. Today, some houses use modern heaters, but the masonry stove has not disappeared. It remains valued for its steady heat and low fuel use. In remote villages, it still anchors the home during winter storms, proving its worth with every slow release of warmth. And after perfecting heat in a single structure, Yakut builders turned to the spaces around it, redesigning their rooms so warmth could be held, guided, and preserved where people needed it most. What happens inside a house when the outside world is cold enough to freeze eyelashes in seconds? In the heart of Yakutia, where winter can drop to -71 degrees, the warmth of a home is not a single room. It is a maze of hidden pockets, each one holding back the cold with quiet precision. This idea reaches back to the early Balagan houses when Yakut families learned that surviving the Arctic meant shaping space itself. One large room could never stay warm at such temperatures. Heat vanished too quickly. So they began creating zones. Small chambers inside larger chambers, doorways covered with thick reindeer hides, heavy felt curtains hanging from beams. Each layer trapped warmth a little longer, slowing the cold as it crept in from the door and the walls. The secret was simple. Warm air could be held like water in a bowl, but only if the walls of that bowl were close. Smaller rooms meant less space to heat. Curtains softened the draft. Fur partitions kept sleeping areas warm enough for breath to rise in soft clouds instead of sharp ice crystals. Families moved through these zones like stepping stones across a frozen river, always staying where the warmth was strongest. This design shaped the rhythm of daily life. The cooking area, centered around a stove or hearth, became the core of the home. Children slept in the innermost corner, wrapped in layers of felt and hide. Elders rested near the warmest walls. Even today, many Yakut houses still follow these old rules, blending modern materials with ancient instinct. It is a quiet reminder that warmth is not only about fire, it is about the shape of a space and the wisdom of those who lived before. And once the Yakuts learned to protect the warmth inside, they turned outward, reshaping the entire house so the sun itself could help them survive the cold. Imagine a land where the sun barely rises in winter, hanging low on the horizon like a pale flame struggling to survive. Now imagine that this faint light is so precious it must be caught, held, and used before darkness returns. In Yakutia, this simple truth shaped an entire architectural tradition. Homes were not placed at random. They were pointed toward survival. The Yakuts discovered long ago that even the weakest winter sunlight carried enough warmth to make a difference. In a place where temperatures fall to -71 degrees, a single degree of warmth can mean the difference between comfort and danger. So every winter, house, from the old Balagans to later Russian-influenced log cabins, was built with its entrance and any small windows facing south, not southwest, not southeast. True south, where the sun arcs across the sky for the longest possible time. The secret behind this orientation rests in passive solar heating. When the sun hits the southern wall, the logs absorb the warmth and store it like a slow-burning ember. Thick larch timbers hold that heat long after sunset, releasing it into the interior through the night. Snowbanks often rose around the northern side of the house, either naturally or placed intentionally, creating a shield against the coldest winds. This design formed a quiet partnership between the home and the landscape. Nothing wasted, nothing forced. Just sunlight, guided by skill and habit. For the Yakuts, this southward gaze became more than survival. It shaped the layout of villages, the way families organized their yards, and even how livestock enclosures were built. Orientation was an inherited instinct. Parents taught it to children like they taught the seasons or the constellations. Even today, in modern Yakut suburbs where new materials and heating systems exist, many homes still turn toward the sun. The old rule remains: follow the light and the house will live with you. And once they mastered the warmth that daylight could offer, the Yakuts reached for another shield against the cold, building barriers that turned the wind itself into an ally. What if the coldest enemy in Yakutia is not the temperature itself, but the wind that tears across the land with the force of a living blade? In some winters, a single gust can drop the effective temperature far below what any fire can fight. Yet in villages, from Oymyakon to Churupcha, homes stand calm behind walls of snow and wood, protected by a method so simple it feels almost forgotten. The Yakuts learned to shape the land itself into a shield. This idea began centuries ago, long before modern meteorology, when families noticed that homes tucked behind natural ridges stayed warmer than those standing openly on the plain. Wind stripped heat from walls, roofs, and chimneys, stealing warmth faster than any hearth could replace it. So the Yakuts created their own barriers. They built wooden fences with tight vertical slats, angled to break the force of the north winds. And when winter deepened, they allowed snow to pile along these fences, packing it deliberately until it formed dense, white walls that could stand for months. The survival secret lies in wind reduction. When the gale hits the fence, it slows, swirls, and weakens before it reaches the house. The snowbanks behind the fence act as insulation, trapping still air inside their layers. Still air is a powerful thermal blanket. Even at -60 or 70, these barriers prevent the wind from stripping heat from the logs of the house, giving the central hearth or stove a fighting chance to warm the rooms inside. Generations relied on this strategy. It required no fuel, no materials that could rot or rust, just the winter itself reshaped into a guard. Children learned to pack snow the right way, pounding it with wooden paddles until it hardened into a shield. Elders watched the drifts, reading the wind almost like a language. Today, in many Yakut villages, you still see these fences standing tall each winter, with snow rising behind them in silent waves. Modern homes may have better insulation, but the principle remains respected. Protect the house from the wind, and the warmth inside lasts longer.